there's just a lot of people at the practitioner level in particular that think Agile is about these, I guess like social aspects, right? The engagement, the interaction, the people, the joy at work, and all those things. And again, all that stuff's really important, but it has to be attached to the business outcomes, which leads me back to the thing that I talk about all the time. Every time we see the practices of Agile not working, every time we see a really engaged team that loves what they're doing, but yet still feels like they're failing, it always comes down to those basic three things, right? How are we forming teams? How are we building backlogs? How are we producing working tested software? How are we organizing teams in the presence of dependencies? How are we orchestrating and governing those dependencies? And what are we measuring and controlling around the team? Over the last 13 years of running Leading Agile, one of the most interesting phone calls that I get, and we get this phone call quite a bit, is somebody will say something to the effect of like, we've adopted Scrum, or we've adopted SAFe, or we've adopted less, and we're not getting the business benefit from it that we want. And I think that's a really interesting question, right? And what it's usually followed with is something like, we're doing Scrum really well, but it just doesn't seem to be working. And so you think about that, right? And you go, what does it mean to be doing Scrum really well and to have Scrum not work? For somebody to say that, what they're basically doing is that they're saying that we have trained product owners, we have maybe a trained Scrum master, we have a team of people that are meeting on a regular cadence and they're doing sprint planning. They're doing daily stand-ups, they're doing reviews and retrospectives, they're probably writing user stories, they might be doing burn down charts, they might be doing agile estimating and planning, they might be doing reviews and retrospectives. And so what they're saying is that we have the roles and responsibilities and ceremonies and artifacts under control, but it's not really working. So that always creates a little bit of cognitive dissonance for me, because I'm asking myself, why would you install a process that isn't yielding the business benefit that you want from it? And then I would ask myself is, what is making it difficult, if you're doing Scrum, to yield the business benefits of doing Scrum? And it creates this interesting dichotomy, separation of concerns, that manifests a lot in the conversations that we have about Agile. And sometimes I'll talk a lot about the idea of culture in an Agile ecosystem. And some people really believe that Agile is really just about collaboration. And it's about how the team interacts. It's about how the team feels. It's about how the team behaves. And that's again, I talk about this quite a bit. That's a big part of it, right? And we want really, really solid teams. But the thing that I challenge people on quite a bit is it's really almost like, what is the acceptance criteria of Agile? What's the acceptance criteria of Scrum? What's the acceptance criteria of SAFe? How would the business know that it's working? And the way I think about that is that the business knows if Agile is working, if the teams can reliably and predictably put products into market, that they can deliver in short cycles on regular cadences, that they can deliver well-architected, well-tested, defect-free code, that they are making appropriate use of the people's capacity on the team, that they're creating optionality to innovate when they learn new information, They are building products in partnership with customers so that we can make sure that we're building the right products. Every business person that I've ever talked to views that as the ultimate success criteria of doing Agile. There are environments where, maybe a company is trying to engage their people or modernize their methodology or increase their net promoter score. There are a lot of companies that are trying really hard to create really open, collaborative workspaces. But the challenge is that high net promoter scores and open collaborative workspaces are awesome if you're able to make and meet commitments to your clients, if you're able to get feedback on regular intervals, if you're delivering great products on time, right? If you're doing it for a reasonable and agreed upon cost profile, we're building the right products, we're able to disrupt the market. And so what I think's behind a question like that is that what people are saying is that they're going through the motions of doing Agile. They're running the Scrum ceremonies. They have the Scrum roles. They have the Scrum artifacts, or they're running the Scaled Agile framework, and they believe, or they were told, that if they did those things, they would get the outcomes that they want. And the problem's a really interesting problem to unpack. It's really kind of a human nature problem. And if you think about, just really big topics, religion, politics, countries, just anything that you can think of, it's like they typically start off as like really, really big, ethereal concepts, right? There's a lot of science and underlying thinking principles and patterns up underneath all of these Agile methodologies. I reference all the books and different things over the last 20, 25 years that I've been exposed to that I think people should read. Because what I think is interesting about that is that the early thinkers in our Agile space, they were really wrestling down the theory underneath Agile software development. And then over the years, what happens is that those theories become codified into practices. And then the practices get taught and the practices get certified. And then after a while, people remember what they were told to do, but not necessarily why they were told to do it. And when you're doing things that you don't necessarily understand the underlying theory behind, then you're led to believe one of a couple things. Like, you might be led to believe that it's just the doing of the practices that creates the results, right? That could be what you're thinking. Or the other challenge could be is that you're doing the things that worked in one context, but because you don't understand the theory or the underlying thinking, you don't know how to adapt those practices to a new context. And so I think the challenge that we're having in the Agile community right now, and candidly for the last 20 years, is that as certification took off and as interest gained, there's a lot of folks that know the Agile stuff and they know the Agile words, but they're not getting the business agility that they want out of it. And because they've detached from the outcomes, a lot of times what they'll do instead is attach to the practices or how those practices make them feel on the account. So sometimes people will tell me things like, yeah, we're doing Scrum really well. Daily standouts, reviews, retrospectives. We have a Scrum master, we have a product owner, and the team really, really likes working this way. And that's a great thing, right? We want the team to like the way that they work. But if the methodology and the team's engagement and happiness being at work doesn't produce results that the business can rely upon, then we're kind of lost. And it's interesting, right? I mean, I've been saying these messages for a long time in the marketplace. And I think a lot of people get it. But I've gotten out recently and we've done some talks, right? We were up at Agile and Beyond up in Detroit. We were at the Tri-Agile conference in North Carolina, talking about like the role of culture versus practices versus structure, things, things that I talk about a lot. And I still think there's just a lot of people at the practitioner level in particular that think Agile is about these, I guess like social aspects, right? The engagement, the interaction, the people, the joy at work, and all those things. And again, all that stuff's really important, but it has to be attached to the business outcomes, which leads me back to the thing that I talk about all the time. Every time we see the practices of Agile not working, every time we see a really engaged team that loves what they're doing, but yet still feels like they're failing, it always comes down to those basic three things, right? How are we forming teams? How are we building backlogs? How are we producing working tested software? How are we organizing teams in the presence of dependencies? How are we orchestrating and governing those dependencies? And what are we measuring and controlling around the team? And it's our belief that if you want your Agile teams to really result in business agility, like we actually want our Agile teams to be Agile, then we have to create the conditions for those teams to be Agile. Decoupled teams of 6 to 8 people operating off of really clean, well-articulated, estimated backlogs with the technical capabilities, the release capabilities to produce working tested increments of software at the end of every sprint. And the challenge is that your Agile will never really result in agility if you're not able to create those conditions. And so transformation really becomes about the idea of understanding the constraints of the current environment. What kinds of things do we need to do now? How might we adapt our methodologies? What compensating controls do we need to put in place while we change the underlying conditions in the organization so that we can create the conditions to actually achieve agility? Walking in with a 2-day certification or a 1-week safe certification, even lots of certifications, and not knowing how to adapt those certifications into the current reality, or believing that doing those practices is going to create meaningful change, is really causing a lot of problems in our industry right now. And so it always comes down to is that every methodology was designed to work in a particular ecosystem. And the active transformation is not to introduce practices or tell people that they need to behave or think or feel differently. Transformation is about meaningful change. It's about changing the organization in a way that enables or allows for agility to happen. And then we enable and support that agility with solid practices and good discipline and behavior. And then all of that great teamwork and everything and all that culture emerges out of that. And that's the way it works when it works, right? And sometimes, if you're in a small work group, you start doing Scrum, like everything's really clear. You're in a big organization and you're a small team and you don't have a lot of dependencies. But in the presence of dependencies, right? In the presence of a lot of organizational dysfunction, in the presence of legacy monoliths, in the presence of technology architectures and organizational architectures that don't lend themselves to Agile, Agile's not going to do a whole lot for you. It will actually cause you problems. So what we do at Leading Agile, right, is we figure out where you are and where you want to be and help craft a very structured, disciplined, outcomes-based, performance-based transformation strategy so that over time you can achieve the business benefits. Because that, at the end of the day, is what we're after. We want great teams. We want positive work environments. I'm a huge advocate of Scrum, a huge advocate of SAFe. I think those methodologies can work. And I think they do work quite often, but they only ever work when we're creating the conditions for them to work. And that's the difference between adopting agile practices and doing an agile transformation. Transformation is about changing the underlying organizational design, governance, metric strategies, right, that are going to lead to true business agility. And the same really goes if you start thinking about cloud migration. The same thing goes if you start thinking about digital transformation. The same thing goes if you're thinking about a composable enterprise. I mean, domain-driven design, a business capability aligned organization. There's so much thinking out there that's starting to converge, and it all comes down to this idea that big things need to be smaller things, and those smaller things need to have minimal dependencies between them. And in the presence of dependencies, you got to deal with the dependencies and coordinate them. And then hopefully over time, you start to break dependencies, and then you can have those teams operate with greater autonomy. And that's how it works. It's just the physics of the situation. So strongly encourage everybody, like, think about it. I know not everybody listening to this has the agency to make those kinds of changes, but I used to ask people all the time when I do interviewing, if you were king for a day, queen for a day, like, what would you do differently? Right? And if you can hang on, if you can see past the current constraints in your organization, you can start to conceptualize the things that you would do differently. When you're in a position of leadership, when you have the agency to make change, then you will be in a position, you will understand the things you need to know to really, really make a difference. And until you're in that seat, right now, you can be an advocate for how to adapt your agile practices to make them work, rather than just doubling down on the basic prescriptions without fully understanding how they need to be applied. So the question is how agile is your agile? And if the agile methodologies that you've adopted are not increasing your business agility, they're not enabling you to achieve your goals, like the business-driven goals, there's a way out of it, right? There's a plan, right? Hit our website, read our white paper, right? It's not a secret. It can be done. So anyway, that's what I thought I'd share with you guys today. And if you have any questions, hit us up on the website, hit us up on the contact page. We are always happy to help.